Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
About
Hello.
that.
Hello. Thank you for being with us finally.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me just welcome everybody as well who are joining us this afternoon. For your information, we have a lot of people here who
Really?
are not just from Taylor's University. We have from other universities as well. We have from UPM, we have from MMU, from Aswara, and from the public as well. So let me welcome again our adjunct professor at Taylor's University, who is also a renowned filmmaker, Adjunct Professor Dain Said. Again, thank you very much for being with us. It is an honor to have you, sir.
Thank you, Azrin.
And also thank you again for still making this possible despite not being well.
Yeah. After 3 tahun,
yeah,
managed to evade it and escape it, and finally that thing got me, and so I've been ill for nearly about 7 days now.
Okay.
I tested again last night, 2 days ago, yesterday, and I'm positive still. So it's really, yeah, but I'm a bit better. But anyway, let's continue. Thank you everyone for siapa-siapa yang join, and everyone who joined. Thank you so much for joining us on this. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a bit of very quick introduction, because I believe that he needs no introduction. Adjunct Professor Dain Said is a renowned filmmaker, not just in Malaysia, but also in this region, especially in Southeast Asia. His films have traveled the world, film festivals, and have won awards. 3 notable films: Bunohan, Dukun, and also Interchange. And before we actually go into our topic today, the question that I did ask him personally, but the answer I want is for him to share with everybody here. First of all, before we get into our topic, sir, how did you first got involved in film? What was your drive?
I think, thank you for the question. I'm going to make it really, it's a long story. I mean, I've always wanted to be a filmmaker. I started out wanting to, only 3 opportunities, or 3, not opportunities, but 3 directions I wanted to take. I was always interested in literature. That was my first love. Literature, painting and drawing. And then of course, at some point, I think when I was about 13, 14, I began interested in films. And then I started reading up as much as I could about films. In those days, there was no internet, there was nothing. So you just spend your pocket money, and buy secondhand books where I grew up. So just learning about it. And that's how it is. And then I attended classes and all that, even like, like they have this thing called, what is it, night classes and stuff like that. That was when I was about like in my teens lah. Yeah. So, and then watching movies and breaking into cinemas around the back to watch afternoon movies, and stuff like that. That's how I got in. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think almost all filmmakers would have this cinema paradiso background story to their involvement in film, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true, in one way or another.
Yeah. So today it's a bit heavy. We are talking about theory in film, but perhaps a lot of people would be asking, why do you need to involve theory in films? If you want to make films, just make films, just point and shoot and tell stories. So that's the very first question going into our topic today. How do you see the importance of theory in films, and what kind of theories are usually involved in films?
Okay. I mean, for me, it depends. When people talk about film, I mean, I've had, even while we're practicing as filmmakers here, I've had people come as interns and so on and so forth in Malaysia who want to do films. And I'm very, very surprised in a very pleasant way. Tak banyak, but I've had a few who come and they either want to be academics, they want to be critics. Very rare, but there have been a few. But that aside, why is it important? People forget that, for me, or it's not forget, but for me, because film has always been part of our cultural output and cultural narrative. And so what we do and how we represent or present stories, characters, people, and all that becomes extremely important. So there's two things. One is learning how to make films. Yeah. And that for me is less important to go to school, because anyone can make films. That's a wonderful thing about filmmakers. Some of the greatest filmmakers didn't go to film school. But what was important is that the culture they come from, right? The whole, I would say, intellectual tradition from the arts is already in place. That means you connect literature, art, paintings, so on and so forth, as part of the educational system. So it's already there, it's a given. Ini jadikan satu your tools intellectually for when you create. So for me, that aside, learning how to make a film, camera, how to edit and all that, that's something else. Learning structure, you can learn even without going to school. But in terms of theory and why institutions and universities, so on and so forth, teach that. Even in my film school, when I went, there was a component of that, and a very important component for a lot of institutions in the West, because it gives you the framework, the intellectual framework to understand the culture that you are practicing in. And we'll get to that later, why is important. So it gives you an intellectual framework. It gives you the tools within which to think. It frames how to think about the world in terms of films, in terms of image making. So then you are actually aware, you know, if you make the character in a certain way and not in another way, why are you doing that? And so it has a lot of social, cultural, anthropological, ethnographic understanding, many aspects of, say, the politics of culture, the politics of representation, right down to architecture, why you use certain architectural spaces and not another, why you use certain things and not other aspects of a particular culture. And we'll get into that later as well. Hopefully that will become clearer.
Yeah. So as you mentioned just now, that there are a lot of other things outside the world of film that are involved in film that a filmmaker pulls in, you know, like you mentioned, you know, anthropology, political, cultural. So are you then trying to say that it is not just about telling a story on screen? You have to be aware of other things as well.
Of course. For me, yes, you have to be aware. Two things. One, you have to be aware of the elements of as intellectual tools, whether you know light via paintings, whether you know photography, and how to break down the narratives, the visual constructs and narratives, right? And when you see images, I'll give you an example in a minute. And then all those other issues which are cultural, but no less cultural is the issues pertaining to society, for example, whether it's culture or politics or other areas. And what I mean by that is culture. I don't want to get deep into it, but take recent films and recent development of Malay or Malaysian films, how race or how nationalism or how women or even non-Malay people are represented in cinema becomes extremely important in you being able to be aware how you are portraying those people, whether it's becomes stereotypical, whether it becomes just a character which has no complexity, and the complexity is what makes it real, or the reality, instead of just going stereotype, or dia tu Cina, stereotype, is an Indian guy, stereotype, well, it's an indigenous or orang asli people. You take that has a history even in Hollywood cinema. Blacks are either servants or whatever the lower caste in the early stages of film, and women were always portrayed only in one aspect, so there's no complexity to it. And then later, and Chinese is like either Fu Manchu or Charlie Chan. And later it became, as blacks became more representative in Hollywood films.
Yes.
But prior to that, what were they? They were just muggers, rapists, and who commit violence. And those are the only reference we have about black culture and black people in American cinema. So those things are important, because it is the thinking that develops cinema. Isn't just, otherwise we'll be doing the same shit over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. So I guess in a way you're saying that our films must not be shallow. It has to have depth in to a certain extent. And as you were explaining just now, one question came to my mind before we actually go into talking about representations in cinema, is that, having said that, sir, what's your view as a filmmaker? Is a filmmaker simply an observant of life, of his surrounding, of his world, based on what you mentioned, be it on the cultural aspect or the sociology aspect or whatever, political, or is a filmmaker trying to make a statement or doing an interpretation on life in his world?
Well, yes, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, you don't, as a person, whether you're an artist, a painter, a writer, and a filmmaker, you don't work in a vacuum. You're always influenced by the community or the culture that you grew up in, that you live in. And of course, whether, I don't think you consciously want to say, I want to do this and I want to represent these people like that, for the most part. But you gotta excuse me, I think there's some workers who came into my roof.
Okay, all right. So we'll wait for him to come back. Many apologies for that.
Yeah, can you keep down your noise? Yeah. So sorry about that.
Sorry.
They didn't tell me they were coming, and then they just came. So anyway, to get back to that.
Yeah.
There are there's so many different levels. So when you create, but I would still like, for me anyway, and I would prefer that to be aware of the environment and the culture I'm from. So what that does is, you said, it gives depth to my work. Yeah. If I'm not aware of it, all it does is portray things in a very shallow way without any real thinking. Now, the point is whether you're going to say, I'm going to make this character into this complex human being, that's fine. But whether you want to say to make him politically right or politically left or religious or non-religious, that's ultimately up to you. But if you don't know what those things are, how do you even begin to construct? And these are what in academic language you call constructs.
Yeah.
Women, for example, are constructs of the imagination. that comes specifically from any particular culture, kan?
Yeah.
Whether you want to make constructs of the black or well, as they say, the other, whether it's black, Chinese, Asian, or whatever, you have to be aware, because if not, you're just going to create the same old stuff that, oh, this black guy must be bad. He must be a rapist. He must be that. Chinese, they must be really snaky or sneaky, and they must be. So these are stereotypes. Right, that is perpetuated in cinema, and cinema therefore becomes guilty of the perpetuation of the stereotypes of the other, and that doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help stories. It doesn't help your culture, and it doesn't even help your film in making a story, especially today in a world where we are far better understanding and the cultures, and it becomes such a global culture. You can no longer make characters yang boleh katakan menghinakan mereka, because you don't want to put too much effort, too much thinking into it. I mean, the recent example, I went to the Makilau, which I don't want to get too much into, but there are so many aspects of that which are just stereotypes. It doesn't do anything, and it's not even great writing. They're just stereotypes. And I'm not hitting on Makilau. I'm not, whether it's good or bad, I'm not criticizing. But what I'm saying is, if we dissect the text and the visual text and the visual narrative, you can begin to unpack the way that the filmmaker, right, creates the work. And there's not a lot of depth in certain characterization. I chose that because that's the latest. It could be many other films in the past. Yeah.
Honestly, this is interesting. As you were talking just now, there are many things that you hit upon which I would like to ask and further discuss with you, but we are constrained with time here, so I'll try and do it one by one. I think next is, having said all of that, is it really important to have all of this? Because looking at it from the perspectives of the audience, do they need to understand all of this? Because we can't deny, at the same time, a lot of people still see films as entertainment. They just want to have a fun time, escapism, going to the cinema while watching a film being played. They want to get so-called entertained while eating popcorn. So will the audience be able to grasp on all of this if you take into consideration of all of this into your films? What do you think?
Well, you can't aim everything at the audience, because the audience is a huge beast. And so there are audiences who will understand, there are audiences who don't, who may not. But that, for me, of course, is an issue, but it's less of an important issue as it is for the filmmaker to be able, or they should know. The filmmaker should know. And why? Let me explain why. Because whether the audience knows or not, what you as a filmmaker put out there for the public consumption, right? Now, if I give an example, how do I do this? If one director makes a film, and let's say he or she stereotype in a bad way a particular character, let's say he may be, I don't know, orang asli, let's put that. I don't want to get issue into Indian or Chinese. Let's just say that. Then one person portrays that bad image. 10 people portray that bad image. 100 filmmakers portray the same image. Ultimately, that doesn't do anything for the development and understanding of culture, race, racial issues, so on and so forth. There are issues.
So therefore, it becomes a perceived reality on screen, isn't it?
Absolutely. So therefore, but like I said, I mean, culture is always a space of contestation, right? it's an area of contestation. So many different people, different belief system, put out work there. And that's what I mean by contested space. What we mean by contested space, your belief is this, my belief is that, but it's okay. It's kind of an expression, right? But what happens when there isn't an understanding of critical or whatever theory there is no growth or development. It just perpetuates the same shit all over again. There is no space atau ruang untuk membukakan untuk discourse or discussion, right? And so what it does is it becomes a stultifying, intellectually dwarf midget of a culture, because it doesn't encourage you to think, and it does not encourage you to open for discussion. All it does is say, we accept this. This is how this person is. This is how this race is. This is how this religion is. It makes for an idiotic cinema as opposed to an articulate, intelligent cinema. But that doesn't mean it has to be intelligence, like macam kita kena tunjuk yang kita bijak. It's not that. It's how you can see it in terms of development of the character, so on and so forth. So there's no development in cinema and in narrative culture if we don't have thinking people creating that.
Okay, so again, I'm holding myself from getting into representation yet. We are just touching on the surface, but I just have to ask this. Having said that, sir, this is going to be a rather sensitive question, but knowing you, from the discussions we've had off screen, I just have to ask you, do you, as a filmmaker, what's your stand? Do you make films to please the audience? Because now and again we hear people saying, you know, especially funders, when they want to fund films, you got to do what the audience want. So what kind of a filmmaker are you? Do you make films because you want to give what the audience want? Do you want to please them? Or you make films because there are things that you want to say, there are things that you want to express? So which one are you? Or neither?
No, I don't think it's a question of a choice. Of course, for me, I want to make films. And of course, for me, it would be great if, I mean, I have to work. My film is never without a context. I'm not going to show it to my mom and my friends. I don't make films for my mom and my friends. But neither do I make it for an ustad, ulama, or whoever else thinks that the narrative I make or the films I make has to be in that direction. For that, I can just say, go to hell to you, because you don't like that, then you go and watch something else. But for me, I don't start thinking, how can I make a film that's going to please the audience? Because you're never going to please the audience, right? It just depends. What I'm saying is you can still maybe please some of the audience, but maybe not all the time. But that's good enough for me, right?
Do you before or while making your films, have you set a certain group of audience in your mind already? Or
no, I mean, this is what I'm trying to tell you, Azrin. Let me get there. The point is, you just create. The moment you begin to talk about whether I'm going to do this for this audience, you already begin to self-censor yourself. And self-censorship is one of the biggest diseases in this country at every different level. One, so that you write, so that you please the authorities, you don't want to displease them. And the authorities may be political, religious, or whatever. And then after that, you have to begin to feel the audience. You might as well not do anything, because you're writing. No one can write with an eye on censorship and curtailing your creativity. You just write. What happens at the end of it, I'm lucky because my producer says to me, then you just write, you just do. I will then come later and we will discuss what we need to do. You have an inkling of an idea, but to say, I'm going to write this for this particular audience, I really don't effing care. at the end of the day, because like I said, of course you care enough to know there is an audience and you make it for an audience, but you don't have to make it stupid just because you want to please one side of the audience and not another. You just create, and hopefully I've been lucky in that I have audiences who come to me, and to me, you know, as Rain, if I get even one damn audience who come to me and they say they love my film, that's good enough for me.
Yeah. So are you then at the same time saying that you have to be true to yourself in making films? Just be who you are and just pour it out.
Yeah, you do. You do have to be true to the core or to the key ideas of your film and your creativity. Of course, you know, sometimes compromises needed to be made.
Yeah.
But I don't think along those routes. I don't think, how do I compromise? I don't. I just think, how do I create this story?
Yeah.
And that comes later for me. Because you see, you know, the problem is, like I said, I go back to, if you're going to have to worry about all the different branches of, in this space, like I said, this contested space of power and culture, you'll never get anywhere. You'll never write anything, because you're going to write for this person, say, "Ya ni salah pula." You write for that person, this salah pula.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But what I refuse to do is to kowtow to the stupidest level just so people can accept my film. I don't, you know, for me, that is wrong.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, if you do that, then you're not there, you're lost, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. But you got to remember also, there are so many different levels, there's so many different groups and spaces within which you need to engage, right? In creativity and in creating.
True. Yeah. Okay, so I think now I should go into the topic. I'm trying to get back to show the screen to show you again, because it shifted to someone else. Hold on. How do I do this?
Essentially, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, my job isn't to censor. That's somebody else's job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not my job. Yeah.
Okay. So you have actually touched on the point of representation, actually, with everything that you have explained so far. So, but to actually begin on the topic, what is your view? Of course, we're not looking for a textbook answer, but what is your view of what is representation in cinema? What do we mean by having a representation in films?
It means, I mean, it is, I mean, and the bare bones, it means what you choose to put on your film or in narrative or in in paintings or whatever. I'll come back to that. I keep mentioning it. What you choose to portray, what you choose to represent, either in the world of the film that you create. That also goes down to, of course, particularly the images of who you portray. Like I said, whether it's lower class, middle class, upper class, whether it's Malay, non-Malays, whether it's white, black. How do you represent, or what do you do in terms of when you curate the presentation or representation of those particular subjects or characters?
And this is all a choice, isn't it? It's your choice as the So would you say then that identity could perhaps be the most important element in representation?
I mean, you can say that, but you know, identity is also so layered. Identity can be creed, religious, can be color, can be race, and ethnic community. So, you know what I mean? So that's why when we begin to talk about identity politics in cinema, which something was, you know, way back, started from the 50s, 60s into the 70s at its heyday, particularly in nationalist, post-colonial, and what became known as third cinema, from third world developed and so-called developed countries, developing nations. So the notions of identity then, of course, is subsumed within the idea of representation. Because I'll tell you why, Chazri. If you're making a film and you're a Nollywood or Nigerian filmmaker, how you represent these are tribal conflicts, between the Tutsi, I think, no, not the Tutsi, sorry, I can't remember the name, forgive me, during the 60s, 70s, there's so tribal, different kind of tribal factions within their society. How do you represent them? And that's intra-identity. And so it's the same here in Malaysia. How do we represent the Indian community? Are they always going to be in a rubber estate? Are they always going to be gangsters? No, you know what I'm saying or not? But it doesn't mean that you like Jagat, for example. I thought it's a beautifully constructed, beautifully made film, but that comes from an Indian person who knows his community and his culture. I mean, I've spoken to Sanjay, and in that, there are gangsters, there are people who have failed, but he's looking at it with a very fine lens and a scalpel to look at his own society, you know, from a very personal point of view. And that gives it complexity and depth. It's not just some mabuk punya orang India, orang India yang cuma rubber tapper, live on the estate and beat up the wife. So it's not that kind of stupidity, you know what I mean? It has very complex nuances to the characters and to the story about his or that boy's childhood living in what I would say, and the underclass of our societies.
Yes. So in a way, it is quoting Jagat there, is giving an inward perspective on that particular race or culture itself, isn't it? And
no, that's a great word. It gives us inward or inroads into that particular society. Because not all of us know what it's like to be an Indian as part of the underclass, living in the Indian community, in the underclass community. We don't know, right? I mean, never mind. I don't even know what Chinese people do during dinner amongst their family, what they eat and how they eat, because we're just so separated in all our our boxes. Sorry, go on.
And that's where films play a role, isn't it? An important role of being a vehicle to transport us, meaning the audience, into other worlds that exist.
Other worlds, other communities, other realities. You know, and I can, talk to you about Yu Hang's film and Tan Chui Mui's films and, James Lee's film. And then, of course, there's the Malay filmmakers. There's also entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. But entertainment also, it'd be great if entertainment also take on nuances and have certain kind of intelligence to the writing.
And one of the modules that we have here in our master's program is Asian cinema. And teaching that, the term that I use just now of providing the inward perspective or inward space is always mentioned regarding Iranian cinema. And that's what great filmmakers from Iran do, like Kiarostami, Majid Majidi. They bring the world to Iran through the landscape, through the poetry, the visual poetry, and they are doing that. What you have just mentioned, not us viewing the Iranians and stereotyping them from what we see, through mass media, for instance.
Exactly. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, I think during or after the whole, that whole 9/11, There were a lot of spades of films that came out of Hollywood and out of the West and even Europe that essentially wanted to give nuance and understand a more developed idea of the issues in Islamic cultures, Islamic countries operating within Europe, or their relationship to Europe or to the West. So it's not just as easy as, oh, they're just Muslims, so therefore they're terrorists, right? And so these are the things that these are the building blocks, what we're talking about, the intellectual building blocks, which is predicated on theory and knowledge of critical theory, all kinds of cultural theory. For me, I take also literary theory, because those were our first instances of narrative storytelling. You know, through actually the actualization of visuals via words. Right. You know, so there's a lot of it coming up there too for me.
And just now you did mention the term intracultural, you know, when you were talking about the film Jagat. But I see in your film Bunuhan, there's a lot to talk about Bunuhan. I think it's been more than 10 years already. But what I see, I watched it again to prepare myself for today, because I first watched it when it was released back then. But it is not about intra, isn't it? What you have done in Bunuhan is actually intercultural within the Malay community itself. And it is not just the Malay community in general, but specifically the Malay community in Kelantan. And it's not the whole of the Malay community in Kelantan, but again, you know, you're zooming in. So my first question regarding that, in the context of Bunuhan, is why did you choose? Because we agreed earlier that this is all a choice. Why did you choose to tell a narrative that is set there? Can it only be told there, or why?
Thank you for that question. I mean, as a creator, you know, filmmaker, artist, painter, writer, the thing is, when you create, and when still discussing this within the context of representation and identity, J. Azrin, the thing is, let's break it down even more. There's also me creating from the point of view of a filmmaker, which means the context, the culture I come from, which is therefore the public, the institutionalized socialization process. In other words, the larger culture, but there's also the personal. So that's the public, and then that's the personal. You know, so the personal, of course, is me. And as a filmmaker, I chose the particular area for a few reasons. One is I'm familiar with that area. Two, I more or less come from that area. Three, the area represent and has certain meanings on a personal level for me, as well as on a cultural, as well as there's aesthetics. There were aesthetic choices that I made. And the aesthetic choices are in the theme of the film. As someone who creates the world that I wanted to create, I was aware of a few things. One of them is, that's why I chose Kelantan on the border of Thailand, because I was always interested in placing my characters and the world I come from, as I did in Interchange. The hybridity, the hybrid of two different cultures, or many different cultures, one. And therefore that reflects in the character and in the place. Why at the confluence of a river and the sea? Because when you go there, and I don't have to spell it out, I don't have to list, oh, this is the place, because you know, it's shifting waters, shifting sands. I don't need to. The thing is because everything shifts in the lagoons from monsoon to monsoon. And I thought the characters are always shifting their allegiances, their emotions. And then 3, I wanted Kelantan, or that part of Kelantan and Terengganu actually, where the sands are all white. Everything, I remember that from childhood. I was always in love with the idea of, if I shoot at night, I thought the house would be floating on top of white sand, almost as white as paper. And the place has got 2 aspects. One is mangroves, which is dark, primordial, primal, because the emotions and the feelings that run through that whole family of violence between brothers and father is primal. It's almost Quranic stroke biblical. Adam and Cain and Seth and those stories of fathers killing sons and sacrificing, the Abrahamic thing of sacrificing his sons to God is one. And secondly, so that's the mangroves. It is dark because I always in a way lean towards the Malay side of animist culture. When I located within the area, the Malays were animists, and we still are, maybe even unconsciously. That's why we believe in magic. We believe in Bomo. We believe in ghosts and spirits. And that's why I wanted that. And secondly, because of the white sands, I always found it's like paradise. It's so beautiful, that part of the world. I wanted to see blood spilled in paradise. I didn't want it to put it in an industrial area. I wanted it to be the contradiction, the contrast between the violence that happens in what essentially to me is paradise.
So I can take it that this film is personal to you. It's a personal film.
I think a lot of films, you ask most filmmakers, are personal, you know, at whatever level it's personal. I mean, it's personal to the point where yes, many things, the characters come from people I know, come from me, and the themes and the stories, sorry, I'm on a webinar. Thank you. Okay, and then. And then it's personal from that level, but it's also personal. You can be personal from a political level because there are some undercurrents of the social and the political in the film. In fact, I would say there's the underlying social and political in all my films. With Interchange is how we engage with the other and tribal indigenous peoples, for example. With Bunuhan, it's how we deal with the people who are, amongst each other within, for example, I wanted to look at men and the violence between men. And so in many ways, it's not so much to celebrate masculinity, but I was hoping to unpack it, to look at the relationships between men. Hence I don't even show women, and the only women I choose to show is the mother, who's not even a woman, she's half crocodile. And so there is the idea of a patriarchy that runs right through the land, which commits and creates those violence.
And talking about characters and representation, even they themselves, within one race, within one world, there were several representations in the characters. I mean, you have again, I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the character played by Pekin.
Bakar.
Bakar, yeah. So
I've seen Burn.
Burn.
Bakar everything.
Yeah, so he has a different representation coming from KL back to Kelantan, and then you have other people there, and then you get to witness all the conflicts that happen. So would you like to explain on the representations of different characters that you had in that film?
What do you mean? I'm not quite with you. Can you?
Meaning,
Yeah.
what kind of representations that you were trying to show with the different characters that you had in the film?
Yeah, with the different characters, I wanted that. Adil is the kickboxer.
Yeah.
He basically Abune lives in a world of violence, because kickboxing is violent, but it's a job. It's still work. It's still what he does. Then there's Ilham, who's a Faisal Hussein character, who also he really works in violence because he's a paid and hired assassin, and they exist in Jazrin. It's not Hollywood style assassin, but trust me, they exist because I used to know a few. Okay, it depends what they're after. You can just say some. I've heard even a bottle of beer, shit, you go and harm that guy, right?
That is enough.
Yeah, depending how close you are to the damn assassin. and then of course there's the school teacher. And I wanted to essentially, they represent various aspects of the culture. And for me, the school teacher, but this is part of the dramatic side, right?
Yeah.
The school teacher for me is the most violent because his is about moral violence. He's prepared to kill his brothers and to kill his father, basically to destroy his family for his greed, essentially. Yeah.
What about the violence within Bakar himself?
Yeah.
That could contradict his appearance of being, through his appearances, politically correct, progressed, modern, appear to be calm.
Exactly. So, I mean, for me, it's just a question of, again, dissecting the characters. I mean, the other two who are supposedly violent are a lot more honest in what they do. They do what they do, and it's a kind of honesty. And there is also a kind of like integrity to what they do. Whereas this is a school teacher who's supposed to teach, but in fact, the worst of all the three brothers, because, like I said, because of who and what he is and what he does, which is commit moral violence upon his father and his family because of greed. Yeah. And so these characters play out on the land and in the world I've created on a personal level, but that's what I can say. They come from a personal level. I believe that they are nuanced enough, because I've met people like that, that I create them not just as a cipher or as a signifier of violence, but I still need to also create them as people, what I mean? Yeah. So, but because that's the art of the drama, right? And there's all the other things we talk about, representations of class, representations of, because he is, Adil and Ilham essentially are people who don't conform to the norms. So they represent those who live outside on the margins of society, right? And they don't even belong to the working class or to the underclass in society. They are the exiles. They are the
lost somehow.
Yeah, the lost souls, right?
Is it okay if I just extend this another 10 minutes, because we started at about 2:40 now? Just
you
to
can
make
extend whatever you want.
Okay, so to the audience as well, I'm extending this probably about another 10 minutes. So talking about representation again in the film Bunuhan, I'm sorry to be talking about Bunuhan again, because that, to be honest, it really excites me to talk about Bunuhan. In the beginning, right? You have not mentioned about this. There is another important element in terms of representation is wayang itself. The traditional wayang wayang kulit. portrayed in the film. You know, shadow puppet.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the film, the very first start, you know, the small boy, he was running, right? And he fell, and then we could see blood. And then he ran, and the camera shifted to provide a perspective from that wayang screen that was torn. And we are looking through that torn screen, right? Okay, would you like to elaborate your choice, or perhaps your justification in putting the wayang element in that film?
Yeah, okay. You see, I mean, this is something I suppose maybe a lot of filmmakers don't really want to articulate. I mean, there are filmmakers who don't believe in articulating what they do in film, keep it as a kind of mystique or mystery, which I think is, you know, but
if you're not comfortable, it's okay.
No, I do. I know I'm fine. I'm fine with articulating what I do. The thing is, thank you for bringing it up. The opening sequences, in many ways, it's like I've done other works there with more the traditional arts, the Mak Yong and the wayang, and that opening, you know, for me, always all forms. I come from the old school, I guess. Cinema always hints or already signifies what happens in the story, right? So when you see those things happening, they walk across the land, this businessman and Bakar, and the kid running, and then those two old men, they were doing some kind of ritual, and that is a ritual for what in Mak Yong or in performance they call buka panggung. You open the stage, but the stage is not just the stage. The stage is the land. The land is the stage, because and then the wayang is also a stage, and my film is also a stage.
So then you're saying that you had a buka panggung yourself in Bunohan. Okay, right.
And so, because if you notice, I did not, and this comes from my training and my interest in art and paintings, because when you look at it becomes self-reflexive. I did not frame the wayang screen where you can see the edges of the wayang screen, and then there's my cinema screen, right? I just go in and it's just the cloth. Therefore, you're not seeing the frame of the wayang. So for me, the fact that the cloth is all you see, that cloth is the cloth of the wayang kulit, but it's also the cloth of my film. So then it begs the question, I hope, and I'm hoping, what is torn? What aspect of the culture is torn in the struggles in this story? Is it the wayang screen that's torn, or is it my cinema screen that's torn?
Because there's something deep for the audience to think.
It's not really the same thing. It's just semiotics, and they are signifiers. So for me, that's the opening. And it doesn't matter if no one else. I don't care. Other people don't understand. So my point is, I work, and I have to work within some kind of framework in my mind of what I need to do. And so that's of value to me, and it helps me create that as a signal, for example, in terms of where the story is. That's fine by me. It doesn't matter if no one else understands it.
But what about...
But let me just add.
Go on.
But it doesn't take away anything from the story. You still understand the story. You still know what happened in the story. How I frame that story, that's up to me. I can layer it, I can load it with meaning. It doesn't matter so long as that story still runs. And for me, I take that as the difference between Godard and Wim Wenders. Godard breaks the narratives. He does everything else to be disruptive. But Wenders uses his ideas, but he does not break it. He does not necessarily just disrupts your pleasure or your understanding of what's going on at the same time. Because my main thing was really, I love new German cinema. But anyway, go on. Yeah.
I just remember now that coming close to our end, I have to do justice here in providing the audience, those with us here, to ask any questions if they do have. Although I still have a lot of questions actually. Do we have anybody who?
Well, next time maybe you shouldn't just do 1 hour. I mean, 1 hour is like what's 1 hour. You should ask your institutions. You know, you don't get much done in an hour. You should be 2 hours. I understand.
There will be more. This is just our buka panggung. So.
Okay.
Okay. Are there any questions from our audience? Anybody? Okay, I just ask you one more. There's a lot of blood. You mentioned blood as well, right? Throughout the film. And visually, of course, like how you intended it to be, it was strong, you know, red on the white sandy beach. What were you trying to represent through the blood?
I mean, it's just, I mean, to me, we spill a lot of blood. And in this particular story, blood, like I said, blood is spilled in paradise. But it's also the blood that runs through the land, the idea of violence that runs through the land. And in the Mat Yong, we actually shot the sequence in Mat Yong, but I never used it. In the end, I decided against it.
Why?
Because when there's the land is sick, and so what happened was the land is sick. You have something you call puja. You puja padi or you puja, so you heal the land. So, and you do the whole Mat Yong ritual and everything for healing purposes. And so why I chose not to, and I just chose to use the tanda papan instead, and the two men walking away in the middle of the night into the darkness, was I thought if I was to do healing, it suggested a potential, sorry, if I did show the Mat Yong, it suggested a potential for healing. So I refused to, I didn't want to do it because I don't think you can heal. Because at the time when I was making the film, I thought that it was so bad the way, because I believe that film is reflected of Malaysia and what Malaysia was going through, and particularly with the Malays and the family and the things that are ongoing in the kampong, because the kampong is always supposed to be the pastoral setting of you know, a certain kind of value, traditional values, you know, which you uphold, you know, but it's been desecrated, you know. So it's I hoped I turned it upside down, the whole thing about the Melayu in the kampong, all the nice values, the lovely, beautiful values. I just wanted to turn it on its head because it's a myth. It isn't that.
So does blood with the color red emphasizes that of you turning upside down?
Yeah, for me, or just the idea symbolically that this place is awash with blood and violence. Yeah, and that's why the mother comes back at the end. Try and heal.
That is a question here from Mr. M. Amin. He put it in the chat. Don't know whether you can see it, but I'm just going to read it. Question for you. When you said about representation, how do you navigate between bringing their voices into your narrative, especially those who are underrepresented or marginalized, and something like poverty porn? For example, is it fair if someone like Dain Said direct a gritty melodrama film situated in Philippine slum like Brilliante, Mendoza? So do you get the question? When you said about representation, how do you navigate between bringing their voices into your narrative? How do you navigate?
I mean, I don't exactly know how Mr. Amin means navigate, but I'll answer what I think he's saying. As a person who creates, and then as a person who is aware and needs to be aware of those issues, thank you, Chairman, that you brought forward, because, and this is again proves my point, you can't do anything, especially when you start talking about the poor or the underclass in Manila, and I have some Filipino friends, underclass, without being either doing your research, knowing really well, really truly well, what the issues and what that's about, to build the characters that you're going to be working in. Preferably, I mean, what I do is, I also have a tendency sometimes when I'm writing, I like to spend time going to the locations that I want to shoot in. So I get to know the place, and sometimes it inspires me.
Yeah.
But also, to answer your question, that particularly precisely what we were talking about, I mean, what Azrin and what I'm saying is that you can't write it without paying very close attention and caring and respecting the lives of those people and the situation, because otherwise you just guna macam like macam sampah aja, shallow, just a backdrop. And so therefore research, reading, getting to even know those people if you can, and and stuff like that. So like even in Interchange, I didn't just make up those things. We met Kenyah people who advised us. So we had advisors on the language and everything else who were Kenyah. They lived in Shalam. And so, you know, so when you say how do, did you say negotiate?
How do you navigate voices?
Navigate.
Yeah.
And so again, even right down to the voices. And when we did, for example, Bunuhan, we had two Kelantanese people, and for the first time, I didn't know this, but there's a major difference between the way the Kelantanese speak in the Ulu, in the coast, or in the middle part of Kelantan. And so all these things become really important, really relevant in terms of representation. So, and I take your point. I mean, that's all.
So I think, is it right then to summarize your answer to Encik Amin's question is that in portraying a different voice from a different world, a filmmaker has to do justice, to at least come close to who they are.
But if nothing else, they have to respect
that
subject. They have to respect the world that they're building. You know, and I think especially in today's world, it's no longer you can do a stereotype of black, stereotype of red Indian, stereotype of Chinese people. It's just, you know what I mean or not? It doesn't work that way anymore.
You have a fan here actually. So this is actually reaching out to a wider audience. There is Shahriar here from Iran, I think. I don't know physically where he is. So he wrote there, I just want to thank him, you, for conveying his artistic points of view about cinema. I am Iranian and a fan of intellectual cinema and got so much motivated to watch Mr. Dain Said's films.
Thank you very much. But you know, I don't do, unfortunately, I mean, I wish I could make the kind of cinemas out of Iran who are actually also one of my heroes, from Makmal Baf to Kiarostami, Majid, as you said. I mean, these are really amazing cinema. I can't do them simply because no one's going to fund me to do that, because the first thing they want me to do is what's your ROI and blah,
Yeah,
blah.
how are you going to get the money?
Yeah. Anyway, so, but Iranian cinema, I think, is up there in the world. I mean, when you look at it. So thank you for saying that. Yeah. So coming back, I think in terms of representation, it is an to today is still a very relevant and important thing, because cinema is no longer just the West. It has never been. It's been global, but as a global language, we need to know and recognize and celebrate the voices of other communities and other cultures, and therefore it's important of how we represent them right and do justice to that in what is essentially the politics of representation, the politics of the image, which is extremely, really important. You can no longer say, I mean, I didn't like the way, let's say, some of these films in Malaysia where, recent films where the Chinese just caricature and he gets slaughtered, and then the Indians also another caricature, and it's just shallow, and it doesn't add anything to the culture or to history. Yeah.
I just got a note here that that I will need to end this session, sir. But actually, like you said, we should be having a longer period in the future. But Mr. Amin actually wrote more things here to ask. I couldn't pose these questions to you because we need to end it now. But I think in answering his question, I think you did that already, sir, because he's asking you what's your view on identity. I think especially within the context of Malaysia, I think your summary just now was that in representing cultures or identity, one has to do justice.
But just quickly, and why I keep mentioning, if you look at paintings and so on and so forth, the paintings of the noble savage, the paintings of the Orient, Edward Said wrote about Orientalism. How the West constructs the other and constructs the Middle East via, for example, Orientalist texts and narratives in paintings and stories. That's where it comes from, and it continues into films today. We cannot ignore it. That's all my point is.
Okay. So my colleague and your friend as well, Associate Professor Dr. Lina Latif, says speedy recovery. Speedy recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Dain.
She's there.
Hi, thank you.
Take care. Okay, we'll talk soon. I couldn't miss the opportunity to listen to you again.
That's okay. Thank you. All
okay.
Right.
Final words, sir.
Well, the final words.
Wrap up.
I really think that I think this question and the idea of identity and the politics of representation in all forms of image making, particularly, of course, cinema, and these kinds of issues should be taught in universities much more than than I don't know. It should be taught, and every aspect from cultural to literary theory to critical theory, because it adds as a framework on which all the creators, filmmakers need to look through as a framework in terms of how you create and how you build the world that you want to show in your works.
Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you for the discussion. Thank you
very
for
much.
inviting me. Thank you for anyone who was out there.
And thank you to the audience as well. I'll speak to you very soon, and we'll have more of this, inshallah. Thank you again. Okay, bye.
Thank you, Ezra. It's been lovely.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.